Far down in the great and dark Pacific Ocean, a Soviet submarine disappeared without warning. No distress call. No survivors. No wreckage, only silence. For decades, the destiny of K-129 was one of the Cold War's most gruesome secrets. Until now. A knotted enigma, buried for decades behind layers of secrecy, has at last been solved, and what's revealed is darker than anyone dared imagine. Detectives didn't merely uncover the disappearance of K-129, they uncovered a chilling reality with ramifications that might have rewritten history. Something so volatile, so deadly, is buried in its wreckage that it promises to upend all we believe we know. This is the tale of the Soviet submarine K-129, at last clarified. But the reality is worse than we thought. During the peak of the Cold War, the K-129 was the Soviet Union's most sophisticated and strategic weapon. A Gulf II-class ballistic missile submarine, it was a result of the Soviet Union's intense engineering, approximately 300 feet long, 2,800 tons, and diesel-electric engines that enabled it to cruise the oceans in close to silence. Built for stealth and longevity, K-129 had 3 R-21 nuclear-tipped ballistic missiles, as well as several torpedo tubes, many of them nuclear-capable. Just its existence underwater was a silent, ever-present threat. The Soviet Union had the ability to attack the U.S. mainland anytime. As America's anti-submarine technology was developing at high speed, the Soviet reaction was straightforward: dive deeper and further. Ships such as K-129 were deployed into huge swaths of ocean, beyond Soviet boundaries, to stay in complete radio silence, standing by to shoot if war erupted. While the true mission contents of K-129 are still classified, specialists assume that it was on a mundane but essential patrol, tasked with some distant patrol box where it would be concealed, monitoring, and waiting. Some speculate K-129 could have been collecting intelligence, following American naval forces, or even practicing a first-strike launch. The Soviet government never revealed these specifics, but unofficial accounts have long suggested that something out of the ordinary was being planned. Regardless of its precise orders, K-129's patrol was a precise fit into Soviet Cold War policy: project a believable nuclear capability at sea, have second-strike capability, and make the world believe that the USSR was prepared, always ready. But things went badly wrong after its final transmission. What followed would shake both sides of the Iron Curtain. Somewhere around March 8, 1968, K-129 failed to report in for its routine radio check-in. In the Soviet Navy, that wasn't a technical error, that was a red flag. Submarines such as K-129 had rigid communication procedures, and failure to signal could mean only one thing: a critical emergency. Initially, naval commanders attempted several times to establish contact. When there was no response, panic swiftly rose up the Soviet command structure. Within a matter of hours, top naval brass and Moscow officials were trying to determine what was happening. A huge search and rescue operation was begun. Soviet warships, reconnaissance planes, and submarines blanketed the North Pacific, sweeping the sea for survivors, oil slicks, wreckage, anything. The search extended over thousands of miles across some of the most isolated waters on the planet. But the Pacific is big and cruel. Days went by. Then weeks. No hint of anything. No wreckage. No signals. No trace of K-129 or its 98-man crew. The pressure mounted on Soviet commanders. Questions abounded: had the reactor malfunctioned? There been an explosion aboard? A collision with an American submarine? Anything was possible. But without proof, no one could say definitely. Adding to the crisis was limited Soviet Navy recovery technology for deep water. The sea in which K-129 sank was much deeper than anything with which they were equipped. They could scan the surface, but below that, K-129 had gone into a black void. While the Soviet leadership wrestled with the loss, one thing was certain: K-129 was lost. Whatever had occurred beneath the ocean, it had been instant, quiet, and irrevocable. But even as the Soviets searched fruitlessly, their American rivals had picked up something strange, and soon, the mystery would take a dramatic turn. Unbeknownst to the Soviets, the U.S. Navy had picked up something strange. In the early hours of March 8, 1968, American underwater listening stations, part of the top-secret SOSUS, sound surveillance system, detected an unusual acoustic event in the North Pacific. It was a tremendous, rumbling sound, short, but unmistakable. Trained experts recognized the sound, an underwater catastrophic implosion. The signature of the signal was what occurs when a steel hull gives way to tremendous pressure. Something, albeit possibly a submarine, had experienced a violent malfunction at a depth much deeper than crushed depths. Employing triangulation from several hydrophone stations scattered around the Pacific, U.S. naval intelligence was able to home in on the probable site, a desolate patch of sea more than 16,000 feet deep, approximately 1,500 miles north of Hawaii. For the Soviets, the ocean had consumed K-129 without a whisper. For the Americans, it had spoken just enough to kindle fervent curiosity, and possibility. What America suspected the U.S. now thought was appalling: a Soviet nuclear submarine had blown up in international waters, away from home and potentially with sensitive technology, or nuclear missiles. Rather than warning the Soviets, however, the Americans remained quiet. This was Cold War spying at its best. Within weeks, a silent but urgent operation was underway. The CIA would spearhead an undercover recovery mission, one of the most ambitious and clandestine in U.S. history. Its mission: find the wreckage of K-129, recover as much as they could, and discover what had destroyed the submarine. And above all, seize Soviet nuclear arms before anyone else got their hands on them. In fact, the Glomar Explorer was a floating fortress of secret technology. Within its huge hull was a towering claw-like machine known as the capture vehicle, which was capable of sinking 3 miles down into the deep, taking hold of the wreck of K-129, and pulling it back up, without ever divulging a single detail to the world outside. The risks were staggering. Success would not only open up Soviet nuclear missiles and encrypted devices to the U.S., they could find out what happened to K-129 as well. Sabotage. Mistaken launch. Renegade mission. In 1974, after years of planning, the Glomar Explorer moved quietly into the North Pacific and initiated the lift. Engineers worked day and night for weeks, slowly lowering the mechanical claw to the wreck. Against all probability, they connected. K-129 was on the way up. In 1974, after years of preparation, the Glomar Explorer sailed quietly into the North Pacific and began the lift. For weeks, engineers worked around the clock, carefully guiding the mechanical claw down to the wreck. Against all odds, they locked on. K-129 was coming up. But then, disaster struck. Midway through the recovery, a section of the submarine broke off and plunged back into the abyss. Only a portion of the wreckage, believed to be the forward section, made it to the surface. The CIA kept most of what was recovered classified. Still, they had succeeded in something once thought impossible, raising a part of a sunken Soviet nuclear submarine from more than 16,000 feet underwater. And the Soviets? They had no idea it had even happened, at least, not at first.